Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is financial advisor Jody Lynn Craven.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And I'm especially happy because we're recording this on Wednesday, which means I get to have conversations with my good friend Jody Lynn. And Jody Lynn, you know I look forward to Wednesday. So how you doing? You're looking good. You're looking happy.
Thank you. I so look forward to Wednesday as well. Our conversations are always so amazing.
They are. And we explore all kinds of stuff. And we are not going to be making an exception on that today because today we're doing something a little different. We're going to be talking with a certified sex therapist. Okay, now, Debbie, if you're tuning in right now, I'm not yet blushing, but I'm sure if you were here, you could make me work on that. Okay, so just getting that out of the way. But her name is Heather Shannon, and she has a very interesting story. She has a very interesting approach to her whole field, to her craft, because she is so positive in everything that she writes about what she does. That alone caught my attention when I saw her profile. And I figured, well, I'm a sex therapist. That's got to be interesting no matter how you look at it. So Heather, thank you for joining us on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Walt and Jody. And you're right. There's never a dull day being a sex therapist.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I like it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
If Debbie G, who does the Friday shows with me, were here, she would be instantly jumping in with some kind of line just for the purpose of making me blush, just to see if she could do it.
And she could do it in about here, then.
5 to 10 seconds. You know, she's really quick with it. Okay. I love her. This is interesting. Sex therapist is the first on this show. We've done a lot of episodes, never one about sex therapy. So
all right. I'm excited.
I'm just going to I'm going to turn the mic over to you for a second just to kind of clue us in. What is this really all about? You know, we'll get the perverts off the stage for the moment. We'll just kind of talk about what's this really all about.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I get that question a lot. People are like, what do you do? You know, what is a sex therapist even? So I'm a licensed mental health clinician. So I'll start with that.
Okay.
And I've chosen to specialize in sex therapy. So, you know, when I first started my private practice, people love to talk about the relationship. So even though I was kind of aiming at people with, you know, anxiety and people with addictive compulsive tendencies, everyone who came in would talk about the relationships. And I had a few like kind of brave souls, I would say, who talked about, you know, sexual trauma related to addiction and who explored gender identity and sexual orientation and fetishes. And what I realized was there's just not a lot of safe spaces to talk really openly about this with someone who's not going to be judgmental, with someone who has any sort of knowledge about these things and can kind of help you know, like, are you on the right track? Are you being healthy? You know, like what really will work for you in your sex life and your identity, really.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I also have another question I've been burning to ask you for the last couple of days because my Monday co-host, one of my co-hosts on Monday is Louis D'Souza, and Louis is an avowed nudist. He loves being a nudist.
Oh, how interesting.
And so, you know, he's made it very, very clear nudism has nothing to do with sex. And I totally buy into what he's saying. But nevertheless, the question kind of automatically percolates to the top anyway.
Absolutely.
So, you know, as a certified sex therapist, when you think about nudism, what do you think about? How does that tie in any way at all with what you do?
I mean, I feel like there's maybe more than one type of nudist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I mean, so I think like your friend and co-host, for him, he's saying it's not sexual. And I can absolutely see there being just sort of like the freedom of kind of being naked and feeling kind of free and like, this is my natural state and I'm just going to like walk around and not worry about it. And I think there's definitely people who are maybe more on the exhibitionist side with how they approach nudism or like, you know, hey, part of the kink community, let's go to the nude beach and, you know, get kind of frisky or show ourselves off. So I think, would those people be straight up nudists? Maybe not. But are they going to participate?
From what I understand, I don't think the nudists would even accept them, to be perfectly honest.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So it's like they might go to a nude beach or they might go to like a nudist place, but they're, you know, there's a different vibe to it. So I think what your friend is describing is genuinely not very sexual.
He lives in the UK. His wife is of Austrian heritage and they go to Austria every year for both winter ski and for summer vacations. They took a holiday just a few weeks ago. And while he was there, apparently he went to, I'm not sure if they both go, he went to some, I'll call it a health club. I don't even know what kind of club it was, but it was for nudists. And
Interesting.
he walks into this one, apparently they have all these different facilities, different rooms and so forth. He goes into this one room and he sits down. He doesn't even think about what's going on or anything like that. And he feels like people are looking at him. He looks up and he sees the entire room is full of women. He says, "Oh, is this women only?" And they say, "No. If it had been, we would have let you know."
Interesting.
So,
Huh. Well, it sounds like an interesting experience. I haven't worked with people who are more on the nudist side of things.
Mm-hmm.
I also wonder if they're just so comfortable with themselves that maybe they don't.
That a lot.
Yeah, maybe they don't need as much sex therapy. Who knows?
I don't think sex therapy really comes into it for them. I think in some ways, from the way Louis was describing it, for them, it's more like this is the natural way we are.
Right.
And for him, it's freeing just to kind of
totally
be in that place.
Yeah, it reminds me of like little children who like don't like to wear clothes,
Yeah.
Just kind of like, why do I have to wear this? This is confining and restrictive, and let's get this away.
Okay, well, good. I got that one off my plate, so that's good.
Good. Okay,
so let's go back to more about what you do, because I don't think you spend a whole lot of time in nudist colonies. So we'll
I don't.
We'll pick one off.
Me either, by the way.
Oh, you don't either? Okay. Well, Jody lives in Canada, so it's even more understandable because, it's cold.
Oh my God. That's what my thought is. Like, it'd be hard to be a nudist. I live in Florida, and there are some nudist places here in Florida because it's warm all year. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Makes sense. All right.
You got to get creative in Canada, I guess.
Lots of heaters. I don't know, like how you would make that work.
Yeah.
No
expensive electric bill.
Yeah.
Send your emails too. So Heather, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing when you're working with people. If you get a client who comes in, I would imagine, I'm going to just guess from my own perspective. I imagine the first part of what you do is just help them be at ease.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, because a lot of people are like, I haven't done this before. I don't normally talk about this stuff very openly. And luckily I do. So I'm like, you kind of
have to be relaxed.
You kind of have to be pretty comfortable.
It's
but
required.
I really enjoy making people feel comfortable. And so I think that, I'm pretty casual. I'm pretty relatable. It's not salacious, and it's also not super clinical. It's just kind of like talking to a friend who happens to be more educated and objective.
Okay.
That's kind of how I look at it. And, for some people, I will share a little bit more about myself or my history too, to help them feel more comfortable. Cause it can also just feel so vulnerable, with it being one-sided. So occasionally, I'll share a little bit about my journey. And also I think people will realize that I'm comfortable, and they're like, oh, okay, this actually is, I can say sex. I can say, body parts. I can say sexual acts, cause I think sometimes there's like, how much do I say? I'm supposed to be like polite. So sometimes people come in and they're still sort of in their like polite society mode. And, I'm kind of like, this is a safe space to just like actually talk freely and explore what you need to explore, and to not let the language, or the fear of saying certain things get in the way of that. So I try to model that for people too.
That makes sense. Also, I'm wondering about how this works generationally. Like I'm late baby boom generation, which basically means we were just totally messed up. And, I was prepubescent.
This is a good topic, actually.
It is.
Because I noticed some different patterns with different ages. Yeah.
Ooh, I'd love to hear that.
Well, that's kind of what I'm asking about, because at the time of the 60s sexual revolution, I was prepubescent at that point. So it was really before I knew what was happening, but I was officially part of the baby boom generation. So kind of like the tail end, so to speak. So what I do know is that when I got older and learned more about what was going on with the sexual revolution, I was just as confused as everybody else was. And messed up as everybody else was. And to be honest, I knew nobody who really felt good about the sexual revolution amongst people I knew. There were people who would, get excited. They'd get excited, all sexually excited and so forth. But in terms of feeling comfortable with it, I can't remember a single conversation I had with anybody that was comfortable about sex in that era. So I will volunteer that the baby boomers among the people who are alive today are the most messed up, but I'm kind of curious to know about the other generations.
I mean, okay, so I do think there's differences, but I also think there's a lot of similarities, So, one of the topics that I'm passionate about is, I think, helping women or people with, vulvas to feel more comfortable with their body. And I've had clients, in their 60s in the baby boomer generation, but then also in their 20s who feel like, I don't know. I don't want to touch myself. I don't really even like talking about my genitals. You'll notice it's difficult to say the words, or sometimes I'll recommend, masturbation for people as a way to kind of figure out how do you discover, what works for you, and to be able to communicate that with a partner. And often when you're by yourself is a great opportunity because, I mean, ideally you're not judging yourself, but that's usually something we have to work through.
Well, that's one of the reasons you end up in therapy, right? I mean,
where, sometimes it's like, I'm in my head, or like I'm thinking about my to-do list and it's hard to get in the mood. And so I do think masturbation allows a little bit more of a safe space, but the reactions I get from people, most people who hire a sex therapist probably are comfortable enough, but there's definitely a good chunk of people of all ages. But I will say, the baby boomer generation. I've also talked to my parents about sex, which is a little bit weird.
That would be a lot weird. Yeah.
They're not together anymore, but, that helps make it less weird, but I don't know why that would just feel much weirder if they were still together. But, I very much believe I want to be sexual when I'm older, but I've worked with clients even in their 50s who are kind of like, well, we're past childbearing years and we kind of were brought up to think that sex is for procreation, and so then they kind of almost shut down sexually. And then I think baby boomers just don't talk about anything. Right. And so that's what I kind of see with my mom. And I actually taught my mom and some of the friends in her building how to meditate. And so 2 years later, they have a group going still, which is amazing. Nice. So I was visiting the group. I was, hanging out with them, and we went to dinner afterwards. And so I was talking with her and a couple other people in her age range. And it was so interesting to hear, just what the perspective is, and, my mom and I try not to overshare with the details.
And whose behest is that? I'm curious.
Yeah, she's always like, Heather, I don't need to know. I'm like, Mom, you're the one who overshares. Let's be clear. Okay.
Got it.
I'm like, I'm not oversharing. But yeah, so we have kind of a joke going with that. But, talking to her friends, you're just kind of like, people don't talk about this. People have sex. They take their clothes off. They do very vulnerable things. As long as they don't talk about it, it's okay. Mm-hmm. Which I find fascinating. So that's kind of the biggest difference I probably see is there's kind of let's just not talk about it vibe with the boomers. Whereas with the 20 somethings, they might have very similar issues, to be honest, but they're probably more likely to communicate about it.
Mm. So do you also find that there is a difference between men and women?
Yes.
Are there issues or,
Yes and no. That's a good question, Jody. Yeah. I do think just the way we're socialized gender wise plays a big role. And I don't really have a lot of male clients that are as uncomfortable with their genitals. And so I think that's something that I see much more with females where it's kind of even getting your period or something, I think it's ew, gross, blood, ew. And I also think having more of an internal genitalia is not as observable,
Yeah.
It's if you have a penis, it's just there, you
hangs out.
You can see it. You look at it every time you go to the bathroom, probably, Whereas if you have,
actually, I don't, believe it or not. It's just kind of,
I guess I wouldn't know,
yeah.
but I'm assuming you at least touch it or something, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's not like I do inspections or anything.
Fair. That's fair. But, there's actually a huge number of people with a vulva that have never looked at it. Literally, like never. Which I think is, yes, really. And so there's kind of like an aversion to touching. There's an aversion to looking at it. There's a feeling of gross.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I feel weird. It's gross. So that's a big difference that I see. And I'm not saying men don't have issues with their penises. You know,
Oh,
I mean,
definitely.
a lot of times,
Yeah.
right? They have different issues.
Yeah.
They might, generally men are like, it's, you know, it's not big enough, right? Is kind of the main one. So that's kind of, or it's not erect enough, I guess would be the other one. So that's a difference. But then sadly, one of the commonalities is just body image across the board.
Yeah.
I actually think that's become much more equal opportunity.
Really?
Interesting phrase.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're all messed up in this boat.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's exactly what's happening. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, cause body image stuff comes up a lot when you're getting naked. So that's, you know, an area I'm passionate about, but it takes pleasure away from everybody. And I'm kind of like, why have we done this to ourselves as a society? And so I'm very passionate about like, let's just accept where we're at. Let's say kind things to our body and let's stop expecting it to, you know, look like some version of perfection that, you know, we've been taught. And so again, it's different things where men maybe feel like, oh, I'm too skinny or I should have more muscles or I'm too chubby or I'm balding or my penis is too small. And, you know, people who identify as women might feel more like, you know, I'm too fat or I don't have enough curves or, you know, my skin is, you know, saggy or, you know, whatever, aging issues and stuff. Although
You have that dimple right on my butt.
yeah, there's a cellulite, you know, so it's like, there's this whole, there's the stretch marks from pregnancy, you know, so there's this laundry list of like things that we're not accepting about ourselves. And then we bring that into the bedroom and then talk about it to our partner about how unattractive we are.
While we're doing it.
While we're trying to have sex and be intimate and vulnerable. Yeah. So like, I think everyone listening knows how well this goes.
Yeah.
You know? But certainly I'm single. So I was on Bumble swiping a little bit yesterday and I like matched with this cute guy and I'm like, oh. And I looked a little closer at his photo and he had like blurred out his forehead wrinkles and his under eye wrinkles.
Wow.
And so I also think it's fascinating with filters. And I'm like, you know what? It's like, I don't blame people, but you just kind of realize like we're sending ourselves these messages that like we're not okay as we are. So I'm just going to like go put my like crow's feet and, you know, sagging whatever on camera more. I think that's going to be my solution.
Well, let's be honest. We are rough on ourselves in every area of our lives. It's not just body image. It's like everything. One of my favorite ways of expressing it is if we treated our best friend the way we treated ourselves, we wouldn't have a best friend.
We would have no friends. Absolutely.
We'd have no friends at all.
Zero.
It'd be ridiculous.
Zero.
We're so mean to ourselves. It's
so
cruelty.
Mean. I think I'm just starting to learn how to be nicer to myself and I do this for a living. So I do want to let people know it's okay. Just like be where you're at in your journey, but like maybe pick one area where you're going to like actively start saying nicer things or like when you start saying like, oh my God, my stomach is huge, you know, to kind of be like, what if I just say like, oh, hey there, tummy. This is one of the things I do is talk to my body parts. And I actually find that to be extremely helpful, you know, and I'll be like, stomach, I'm sorry. I've been like a real jerk to you. You know,
I like that. That's nice.
One of the methods that I work with people on is called internal family systems. And so you do like some parts work, but it can be sort of more of a metaphorical part, of your body or energetic system. So it can kind of be like an anxious part or it can be an inner child part or an inner critic part, but it can also be like a literal body part. You know, and so I have clients who do this kind of parts work, you know, with their genitals, with their stomach, with their heart, you know, everything that kind of shows up in our intimate relationships.
That was one of the hardest things exercises I was ever given by a coach is like, look at yourself in the mirror naked and say, I love you to all of the parts. That was really hard.
Did you do it?
Yes, I did it. I did.
How did it go?
It changed forever the way that I see my body and the way that I treat it because I was being an AH to every part of me like that I thought was imperfect.
Yeah.
So it was a very powerful exercise, and it was very difficult to get the words out for places like, I'm like, oh, my arms. Yeah. My shoulders. They're nice. I love you. Great. Whatever,
That was okay. It was
like
more neutral. Yeah.
As your body changes, like I'm 37 now, and my body does not look naked the way that it did when I was 20.
Right.
And, so looking at it again, and I think you guys were talking about nudist colonies, and I was blushing like, oh my God, being naked in front of anybody else but my husband, like even by myself, I wouldn't do it. Oh God, there's a mirror. Like, it's just not, I'm more conservative than that, I guess. I don't know.
I haven't asked Louie about that. I'm curious to know if they have mirrors in nudist colonies. I don't even know.
That's interesting. I wish Louie were here. That would be so interesting.
Oh, he'd be giving a completely different take on this.
I know.
Oh yeah.
Next time.
But yeah, but the body image is fascinating, and I've certainly been, I now don't make any negative comments about my body. Certainly not while I'm naked with somebody. But that's just a no-go. I just don't ever do that. I'm just like, why would I ever do that? Right. So I think even for people listening to like, what if you just make a decision now? Like, oh yeah, that makes me feel like crap. It kind of takes away the other person's pleasure too. Mm-hmm. And then we're probably both more in our heads. And then we were both also just bringing in more negativity. So like, what if we just don't do that anymore?
And the reality is that in that moment, when I've had somebody else say that to me, like, oh, this or whatever, like when my husband's like, oh, I'm chubby, or, like turn off the lights or whatever, I wasn't even in the realm of thought that he was in. Like, what? Huh? Like, what are you talking about? I wasn't even looking at that part, or I wasn't seeing things the same way. I wasn't looking at him and being like, oh yeah, you need to lose a couple pounds. That was not even in the realm of thought of where we were. Cause I don't see him that way.
That's my experience too, is like, I don't make those comments ever anymore in those situations, but the last two partners I have been with have both said negative things about their body. And it kind of kills my joy, because I was kind of like, oh, I was trying to focus on what I like about you. I'm like, I'm attracted to you. And it's almost like, are you criticizing my taste?
You got bad taste?
And I mean, I had a male client years ago, and I don't know if he had met his girlfriend at the gym or something like that, but I think she had gained some weight and he didn't really care, but she kept pointing it out and kept pointing it out and kept pointing it out. And eventually he did start kind of questioning his attraction. So it's like, are we trying to talk people out of being attracted to us? If so, keep going. But I don't think we are.
I don't think that's the intention.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So like, let's just be really, really nice to ourselves. And it's like, if we have the thought, maybe you could just be like, you know what? I'll do some parts work with that later. Now is not really the time for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yet there are times when it is appropriate to bring stuff like that up as an issue, because I'm thinking about my relationship with my wife. When we first met, she told me about her background, that she had experienced anorexia.
Oh, okay.
And she considered herself still to be in recovery. I can tell you quite honestly, there's absolutely not a shadow of a doubt that she is out of recovery. But we'll put that aside for a moment. The main thing is she felt like she needed to tell me about it. And since she's also a former psychotherapist, at the time she was a psychotherapist, I felt like I really, really had to listen. And it's an interesting tightrope to walk, because as far as I was concerned, she was fine.
Right.
But I also wanted to respect how she was feeling about it.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a beautiful way to walk the line to me.
It was the only way I could think of to do it, to be honest.
Because we can't convince someone to feel differently about themselves, like that's really the other person's work to do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they might be kind of digging for a compliment or validation. And so we don't want to be like a jerk about it. But personally, like, I might say like, I think you look good. Let's not focus on this, it depends on the context. If you're in a longer term relationship, then it might be like, okay, how can I support you with this? It's important not to get codependent with it, and take responsibility, but to just kind of, listen, be a witness. One of the things I've learned working with body image over the years is it has nothing to do with what the person looks like, and I've heard people say fat is not a feeling. And I kind of feel like the reverse. I'm like, fat is not based on fat. Fat is a mental state. When someone's like, oh my God, I'm so fat today, or I feel so fat today. it has like almost nothing to do with their body and just everything to do with their thoughts and emotions.
Well, it's appropriate
I
also
agree.
When you think in terms of how dietitians, not so much dietitians, but people interested in weight loss focus on not eating fat, which has absolutely nothing to do with being fat. So why not also have a factor where, fat itself is not even part of the conversation? It's just, it's like everything is disconnected from itself.
Right. But I think it's like when my clients start like working out or eating well, even before they've like lost any weight or really changed anything noticeable at all about their body, and they'll even admit this, they start feeling better. And I think it's because they start talking to themselves a little bit differently, and they start feeling maybe a little bit proud of their behavior and their actions, and they're showing up for themselves, Depends if it's in a kind way. Their energy's totally changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I want people to know that too, is like, I've had clients who, are thin and trim and obsessed over 3 pounds. And one of the fascinating concepts to me is like the moment before you step on the scale and the moment after you step on the scale. It's like you're literally the same person. Like nothing has changed, but like how you feel could be drastically different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just a fascinating concept to explore. So it could be like in your head, you're thinking, your weight is a certain number, and then you step on it, it's, 3 pounds more, and you're like, oh my God, this is a terrible day. Nothing's working. I can't control my body. I have no control. And we'd start telling ourselves all these messages, and it's fascinating. So I think to just start realizing like, this is kind of just like a mind game. And what if I stop playing that mind game with myself?
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating what we're attached to and then the meaning that we derive from it.
Yeah.
I started like a weight loss journey last year. I just wanted to lose some weight, whatever. I was going to do it. I was sick and tired of me being where I was at. And I started doing Noom and tracking things and whatever. And they suggest that you weigh every single day. And that was the first thing that I noticed.
Interesting.
Was how attached I was to the number, and doing it every day and being mindful of all the things that I was saying to myself based on what that number was and the meaning that I was giving it. Yeah. Having that awareness of those things really helped me detach from the actual number.
Oh, that's so cool.
Not that I'm completely like, healed from that, because I still step on the scale and like, whoa, okay. But it's interesting how it's all in the mind, and it either makes it better or vastly worse. Right. Whatever it is you're saying or the meanings that you're creating right then.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things I've noticed for myself, because, my weight's gone up and down over the years, is, I could be the same number in the present moment, but if I'm on an upward gaining trajectory, I feel one way. But if I'm on a downward losing trajectory, I feel a totally different way, which I just think also is fascinating. So it's like in the moment, it might be the exact same number, but I have a completely different thought and feeling.
Yeah. You know what? Something similar happened to me. So I went on a crash diet for my 30th birthday.
Fun.
And it was really awful. Like I think I ate like 500 or 600 calories a day.
God.
I just treated my body like crap. And I lost weight very quickly within like 30 days. I was at my ideal weight. And what I've noticed having a new awareness is over the last year, I have arrived at within 5 pounds of that weight.
Oh.
But I feel completely different.
Oh my God, Jude, I love this story.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, even when I was at that weight when I was 30, I felt like I still wasn't good enough, and I wasn't thin enough. And my friends were starting to tell me that I was getting too thin, and that they were worried about me, and probably because I lost the weight so quickly. Yeah. But I felt good in those moments, but I still felt like I was fat. And then, being within 5 pounds of that weight now, I feel I look completely different. It sits completely different. And it just, the whole experience is different, even though there's a 5 pound difference.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's all in the mind.
It is. And I mean, I think like, law of attraction wise, it's like the energy that you bring to something creates whatever you manifest.
Yep.
So I feel you're bringing a healthier, peaceful energy where you're coming from a place of self-care versus like recrimination or punishment.
Yeah.
It's like, that's so drastically different. So that's something I work with my clients on is like, yes, have whatever goals you want to have for your fitness and health. I'm not saying like, don't try to be healthy or something, but like, where is it coming from? Is it coming from I'm unacceptable as I am? Or is it coming from I'm worth putting time and energy into.
Well, that was the big value I thought in what you were talking about a moment ago, Jody, when you talked about doing the mirror work naked. I actually have done mirror work, and I've even told stories about the mirror work. I almost never do it naked. I ought to try that just to see what kind of result I get out of it.
Yeah.
But I just remember from I love telling this story, but the first time I tried it, not naked, just looking in the mirror into my own face, my session went very much like this. I love you. Oh God, I can't do this. That was my entire session.
Like one eye open.
Yeah, right. Which really goes to illustrate that it really isn't the body. It really isn't any of that stuff. It's how we feel about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. I love that. I did some mirror work that was really interesting, and it wasn't body specific, but it was, I think it was maybe more emotional. Just like, what would I want someone else to tell me? Like kind of almost, I sometimes think if there was like a fairy godmother and she could just fix anything or do anything or say anything, and it would be like the perfect thing. What would she say? And I like wrote it down, and then I read it to myself in the mirror, and like I was crying like a baby.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to try that one.
That sounds very good.
And like kind of like looking in your own eyes in the mirror and doing it. So that was an intense one. Highly recommend.
Now I'm trying to marry that one with doing it naked, and like my brain just won't go there.
Yeah, I know. Maybe try it first.
I think I'll try it one. Yeah.
First clothes. Yeah. Then try naked if you feel like it.
Yeah. And I mean, like you could just start with the top half naked and then graduate the next day or something.
There you go.
Louise, leave me alone. Need the bathroom.
So funny.
Meanwhile, my face is looking at me and saying, look, I have enough to deal with here. You go out and deal with the rest of it? Come on, give me a break here.
Oh, so
boy.
I have a question about sex.
Yeah, please.
What is between your clients that are coming in to talk about relationships? I don't know if like the husband and wife or, the whole couple comes in or a part of the couple comes in.
Could be either way.
Both. What is their like most common frustration or complaint or thing that they're looking for guidance with?
It's interesting because when I picked this niche of sex therapy, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be pigeonholed, And now that I've gotten into it, like there's so much within sex therapy. So with couples, I tend to work with a lot of low desire or just like difference in libidos. Or I work with people who want to open their marriages typically. Those tend to be and communication issues. I mean, there's always communication issues. And some of that comes from, maybe someone grew up more conservative and doesn't feel comfortable talking about sex, but they kind of know they need to. So they're pushing themselves and coming to see me. So that's with couples. And then individuals, it could really be like a gamut, So like I've had people come in wanting to discuss like their sexual orientation. Maybe they're attracted to people of the same gender. Maybe they're attracted to people who are transgender or non-binary and they're like not 100% comfortable with it. Maybe they're looking to change their own gender and they want some support, maybe bring their partner in once in a while. Or not change their gender. I should say like transition their gender to the gender that actually feels in alignment for them. And then sometimes there's like betrayals with couples, but then usually that winds up leading to the lack of sex, so it still kind of goes back to that. I do have people who are exploring, kink and fetishes and, non-monogamy as a single person and just kind of figuring out like, okay, I haven't really done this. Like, how do I navigate this? And then I do get some people who, maybe are dating and having lots of sex, but then feeling kind of guilty about it. Or, I've worked with people who are, either from like conservative, Christian, maybe Mormon backgrounds and, kind of starting to free themselves from some of the sex negative messaging, from religion. So there's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I would think it would be almost unlimited, to be honest. I mean, I kind of imagine, again, coming from the baby boomer perspective, I can remember when Masters and Johnson couldn't even be discussed in private with people. You couldn't even talk about it. It wasn't even allowed in the conversation.
Yeah.
It's not like you were told, don't talk about that. It's just that if you tried to, you'd be shunned. No one would pay any attention to you.
I know.
And I also think about how a lot of stuff, this is something we talked about in other contexts here on the show. A lot of things happen generationally that get passed along.
Yes,
absolutely. And we still don't really totally grasp how they get passed along, but they do. I've experienced it myself just with economics. And I think about, okay, all the sexual mores, if you can call them that, when I was growing up, how are they affecting not only me, but generations that have come after me?
It's a really good question.
I just think it's very likely that it's affecting people who are, Gen X or millennial or Gen Z or whatever in ways that they don't even know.
Right. Yeah. 100%. And I mean, that's part of why I love my job too, because I do think that people who are willing to come see a coach or therapist are the ones who are willing to kind of do the healing work of the generations. They're kind of like, all right, the buck stops here, basically. Like, I'm going to do the healing work. Let's change this moving forward. So I'm not passing stuff down to my kids that doesn't feel good. So I love that. It's not easy to face things head on and do the inner work. It certainly helps to have support, but it's super rewarding, to see people reconnect with their partners and feel more accepting and freer in their own sexuality and who they are, and to be able to communicate that and have more pleasure and intimacy in their lives. Like, it's super rewarding. I love it.
Yeah, I could see it would be. And this is obviously, to me anyway, it's obvious. This is a topic that is endless.
Totally endless.
There are no boundaries on this. I mean, there are boundaries. Don't get me wrong, but there are no boundaries of exploration.
Yeah. Right. But you're right. I think like some of the things that have been passed down from generations are about like, we're not supposed to talk about sex. We're just kind of supposed to do it. I think that consent is a big one that I think we still have a lot of work to do. I am one of the sex and relationship experts for the Peanut app. And so I do like a weekly free pod on there. So if anyone wants to come ask questions.
What is that? The Peanut app?
Yeah, it's an app of like 2.5 million women are on there. And it started out as like new moms, but now they've expanded to like women at all stages of life, through menopause and beyond. And yeah, so people can come, and it's sort of like a Clubhouse type of thing. I don't know if you're familiar with the Clubhouse app, but it's sort of like an audio thing. So I host like a pod. It's not recorded, so people can feel comfortable like speaking freely. No one's going to like see or listen to it afterwards. And so people are pretty open, and so I get a lot of interesting questions, and I hear a lot about, most of the people in there who have identified their sexuality definitely some bisexual people in there have talked about bringing in a third person, who's a woman, but also people who, most people are married to a man in there. So people will talk about their husbands and, feeling kind of pressured or coerced at times with sex. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's something that, couples I've worked with, the guys have actually been open about that. Like, yeah, I was coercive and I know I shouldn't have been, or, I was kind of pressuring. So that's been, eye-opening for me, just that like, what women kind of put up with, what guys do. And I think it's because we don't talk about it. I think that guys are in a position where they're kind of like, I don't know how to get my needs met, and I'm like trying to communicate it, but I like maybe don't have the ways or words to do it kind of like quote unquote the right way. And I think, women sometimes feel an obligation, that's another gender difference, Jody, to speak to your earlier question. Women sometimes feel an obligation to, like, oh, okay, well, like we're married and I'm like supposed to satisfy his sexual needs, even though I'm like not really feeling it right now. So that's something that I'm like wanting to help to undo as well, where like people can just have conversations and, and certainly sometimes in a hetero relationship, the woman's the one with the much higher sex drive. Like that happens as well. But it can be tough to navigate, like how do you get your needs met? How do you not feel kind of bad or guilty if you're the one with the lower, drive? How do you avoid getting into a situation where it feels like a chore or it feels pressury?
Yeah, there's a lot there. It's, like Walt said, no bounds. Infinite. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, I do think the patriarchy has like influenced a lot of this. Mm-hmm. Where women are less comfortable with, genitals. Women think it's more for men. Men tend to be the people who pay for porn. And so the porn industry, which is meant as entertainment, not as education, tends to cater more towards men. So a lot more blowjobs are shown rather than, men going down on women. And, the orgasms are like super unrealistic. So not all the time, but there's a lot more unrealistic orgasms. There's there's still a belief that women should be able to orgasm vaginally without clitoral stimulation. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty rarely the case. Like certainly that's possible for some people. It depends a lot on, anatomy. But yeah, I had a question recently on the Peanut Pod about, I want to have a real orgasm or a regular orgasm. And I'm like, the regular one is with the clitoris. I'm like, let's just not get it twisted there. So I think that type of education, it's like, how are people supposed to know this?
Yeah.
Certainly this is not taught in sex ed. No. Certainly this is not taught through churches in the family education section or whatever.
Yeah, you're not having this conversation with mom.
Right.
Yeah. No.
Which is odd because that's what the original stereotype was. The parents sit down and have the talk with you. They never did.
Oh my God. I didn't get it. It's so interesting. So like my mom is less comfortable. I'm like forcing her to get more comfortable now that I'm a sex therapist. But when I first told her I was becoming a sex therapist, she was like, "Oh, that's weird." That was her initial reaction.
Just the support you want to hear from your mom. I love that. That's great.
Yeah. Now she's totally on board, and she's like, it is good, and I'm realizing it is important to talk about it. And her and her friends and I had a great conversation. But I think we have to kind of give ourselves a chance, almost like be a little uncomfortable for a while until it becomes more normal for us.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that occurs to me is, again, this is something that I know from the baby boomer generation, although I think it's carrying on today. You've actually indirectly referenced it in some of the ways you've described some of your clients, or at least referred to some of your clients, and that is, gender roles.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, gender roles was a huge deal because it was right at the beginning of what I'll generically call the feminine revolution. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was among those who was absolutely, totally out of it. I had no idea what my role was. I had no idea what women's role, what roles made no sense to me whatsoever for years.
Interesting.
For years.
That sounds kind of like a good thing.
Kinda.
Because then you're like you're not maybe following the social script as much and you're actually just like, I'm actually curious
I was
how you handle
withdrawing
that.
more than anything else.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So that's what you did. Yeah.
Because I couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one area where I think that, genderqueer people, there's not as much of a social script. And so I think there's a lot of wonderfulness basically that comes with that, where it's kind of like, hey, this isn't as predefined for us. And we get to actually just like check in authentically and see like what works and just kind of be who we are and figure it out as we go. And I think that can be tougher, like it's more work, but I think you can kind of get to like a more aligned, authentic place that way. And so I'm kind of hoping that, people who are cisgender and identify as a gender they were assigned at birth or the sex they were assigned at birth, that they can also do that. It's like, okay, so maybe here's some of what society is telling me. What if we throw all of that out the window? And then just like start from scratch, like what actually feels good and right.
Well, and I think a lot of times when I have felt anyway that, that as a woman, I have assumed this is what my role is, or this is my job as a wife or a partner or whatever. And I had this big conversation with my husband because I felt overwhelmed with running businesses and the household and all of these things. And I started to feel angry and resentful. And, I'm very, I look towards myself and I reflect on what am I feeling and why am I feeling it? And it came down to this boiling point of, because I have all of these things that I have to do. And it was the question of who says that I have to do them? Well, I have to do them to be a good wife or a good partner to my husband. And I, got the courage to ask my husband, What do you expect of me? And that was a really hard conversation. Luckily, my husband, you know, he loves to have conversations like that with me.
That's awesome.
And what he said was nothing, you know. I expect nothing. I want you to be happy. What makes you happy?
Oh my God, he sounds like such a good husband.
Such a great husband. But it goes right back to communication and what we're assuming about our partner. And like, you get married and you're supposed to know all of these things.
Yes.
Yes. You know, even if you've been, you know, living with somebody for quite some time, we just don't take the time to have this conversation. What do you want your marriage to be like? What do you want your household to be like?
Right.
For me and Nate, it flips. Like in the winter, he's got more time, so he helps do more dinners and clean and stuff like that. And in the summer, that's kind of more my role. But since that conversation, I've been able to take the pressure off of myself and not feel so bad when I'm exhausted and say, you know, like, we're having peanut butter sandwiches, or we're having eggs and bacon. Like, I just don't have the capacity to make you anything more than that. So if you want something else, you can make it yourself. But before him, I always tried to keep up to all the men in my life. Like I had a very, I don't know, wounded version of women. Like I looked at women as weaker and judged myself for being weaker and wishing that I could be more like a man, because I grew up in a male dominated industry and I was trying so hard to be like a man. Yeah. And I did that with my relationships too, trying to keep up. You know, my dad, you know, all relationships, my dad is very like, go, go, go all the time. He's always doing something. And I always felt guilty. And my husband is very similar to my dad, where he's always doing something. So I started to feel that guilt pattern come back up of like, oh no, I have to be doing something. Like I shouldn't just be relaxing and watching TV. And that has taken a lot to reprogram within myself and allow myself the space to do what I need to do to feel good.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that. Like, I think that's important for so many people to hear, you know, that, yeah, I think there's been a lot of, I don't know if I should say canceling, but like bulldozing of feminine energy.
Yes.
You know, and I'm saying energy, not just women in general, because we all have feminine energy, but we have a very like hyper action oriented society that can get into that like more toxic, imbalanced masculine energy. And I know that I certainly feel it. So I appreciate you mentioning it. You know, I know that it's easy to be like, I just have to work harder. I just have to do more things. You know, I have to be good enough and prove that through action. So I actually do think what you just said really carries a message of worth and good enough, you know, that I think is a core wound for most of us on some level.
The world. Yes.
Really, just the world. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not just women. I mean, men feel it too.
No.
Men feel, well, we're the bread givers. We're the ones who have to go out and we have to do. I still experience that. I deal with that on a almost a daily basis, not quite.
Yeah.
But just trying to give myself a little slack and say, hey, it's not all on you. Don't treat yourself like it's all on you, for goodness sake.
And like these gender roles are fascinating when it comes to sex too, and like initiating, because there's often the idea of like, well, the man's supposed to initiate and the man's supposed to have a higher sex drive, and often that's not the case. I mean, honestly, from what it's like pretty 50-50, you know, and I think there's like a lot of misunderstandings and assumptions around that, and then there's, you know, some women that are kind of like, oh, that's like bad, or I'm like, if I have to initiate more. And there's some people who don't care, you know, but I do think that some of the ways we've internalized gender roles can get in the way with initiating and sex drive for sure.
Yeah. Even turning it down, you know,
yes.
I have thought it's okay for my husband to turn it down, or it's okay. It's not okay for me to say no. I have thought that before in relationships. Like if it's requested, I should be a good little housewife and give it. Those aren't the exact words that go through my mind, but I have beaten myself up after declining. And now that you were talking about these rules, I just realized that I've never been like mad at him for declining. I'm only mad at myself when I have declined.
Interesting.
Which is, that's crap.
Yeah.
It is crap, but it's like we all have our own stories. And so I think kind of the personal growth work of, sex coaching or therapy is to figure out which stories do you have. Yeah. So it sounds like you have the one of kind of like, I need to be like the people pleaser. I need to satisfy his needs and be the good housewife. Other people might have the story of men are supposed to always want sex. He should never say no. Yeah. So like everyone's just got different stories and we just got to figure them out and then decide if they're working for us or not.
Mm-hmm. Do you find though that, or how would you suggest having those kind of conversations without like getting into a fight? Because it is very sensitive. And, if I was to say to my husband, I want to have more sex, he might take it negatively, like I'm upset with our sex life. And that's not necessarily the case at all. I just like more of it. I don't know.
I think how you just said that actually is great. I'm not upset at all. I kind of just want more. Like this is kind of doing it for me. Can we do more? Can we do more of this?
So just amazing. Communicate that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of the most funny things for me is like when clients ask me stuff, kind of like you just did, of like, well, I just don't know how to say blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you literally just said it perfect. I'm like, maybe the key is pretend you're talking to me because I think when they imagine talking to their actual partner, there's like a whole series of like thoughts and emotions that then get them in a weird headspace.
Yeah.
But when they're talking to me, they're like comfortable and they're free and they're just like saying it calmly and they're not like riled up and then it works perfectly.
Yeah.
So that's one technique, pretend you're saying it to like a neutral third party and just talking about it. I tend to bring things up in sort of like, a cutesy way sometimes, or like sometimes try and use a little humor. I also am a fan of like the compliment sandwich.
The compliment sandwich. Okay.
The compliment, if you have like a piece of like feedback of like constructive feedback in there to be like, you seriously look so amazing with your shirt off. I would love if you did oral sex with me a little bit longer. And that technique you used on whatever was amazing last time, so it's like you're kind of like sandwiching the feedback in between some compliments. They have to be sincere and you have to like, flow probably a little bit better depending on the conversation, but it depends on your partner too. Some partners, it's like you could just be super direct and they're not going to take it personally. Some partners are going to be like real sensitive and they're like, oh my God, you're criticizing my sex skills. And then they feel like terrible and cringy. Yeah. And so I think it's that balance between like, okay, you want to take into consideration your partner's style without getting into codependent territory where you're trying to like manage their emotions for them. So it's like, be considerate, say things in a nice way, but realize like your partner's reaction is your partner's reaction, and I had an ex-boyfriend who had to tell me at one point, like it's kind of hard to bring things up to you because you're so sensitive. And I was like, oh. And then I was like, I don't want you to not be able to bring things up. And so then that was an area I kind of had to work on. And I think that relationship helped me get much better at taking feedback. And so I would say if you're the one receiving the feedback, just realize like this is not a reflection on your character. This is not a reflection on your worth. This is actually how you get to a stronger relationship. Mm-hmm. And if your partner wasn't invested in having an even hotter sex life and an even stronger connection, they wouldn't even be telling you this. So,
that's so true. And it's so interesting how we take everything, and I mean this as a blanket for pretty much the entire world of people, that we take everything so personal to like a soul level. I am good or I am bad. If somebody makes a suggestion or tells you something, we get cut so deeply. And it has nothing to do with that. It's the opposite. They want to have, whether it's more sex or more conversation or more whatever, they're trying to connect with you on a deeper level and get more of what they need and want, which has nothing to do with you being good or bad.
Which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Really. Like the way you just said that, I'm like, yes, that's great. And one of the books I like to recommend for that is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. So he has a whole chapter on don't take anything personally. And I read that many years ago, but when I first read that, I was like this radical. I'm like, what do you mean? Some things are personal. Like, I don't even get this, So it took a bit to wrap my head around it. And now like that's something I work on with my clients all the time is like, your partner's reaction is about them. That's about their thought model. That's about what are they thinking and how is that creating the ways they're feeling? And then how does that lead into the ways they behave? You know, and that actually has nothing to do with you. Like you could have 100 different partners. They're all going to react differently.
Yeah.
You know, and so then I think we start to realize like, oh, maybe it really doesn't. Maybe that's just about them and I can let them handle their own stuff and I can focus on mine.
Yeah.
One thing we haven't touched on yet is people who are in relationships, committed relationships, but they've lost interest in sex.
Oh yeah. That's a real big one. Wow.
The way you say that, it sounds like it's almost common.
That's probably the most common.
Is it really?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. For couples, it's either like the lack of sex or opening the marriage are kind of the two things I get. So the lack of sex one, there's so many reasons for that. And so it can be helpful to have a professional, like, you know, working with you to figure that out. It can be hormonal. It can be past traumas. It can be thoughts and beliefs that are almost like hidden in our subconscious about like, oh, I'm too old for sex. People of my age are not supposed to have sex. Or, you know, sex is only supposed to be for procreation. Or, you know, I had my uterus out and now I just don't feel like as much of a woman and people might not realize that. Or, you know, there's some kind of grief in the relationship that I haven't processed, or there's some kind of betrayal that I like actually never healed from years ago. So there's, you know, it's interesting because like when I tell people I'm a sex therapist, they're like, ooh, salacious. And you talk about like all of the kinky things. I'm like, yes. And
yeah, I totally thought of that movie, Meet the Fockers, the mother or whatever. She's like on the wedges and that's exactly what I had pictured.
But it's like, you know, you went through a lot of deep healing work and like deep emotional work that kind of goes with sex. And I think sex is naturally so holistic. It's like a very like mind, body, spirit thing. And so it kind of, you know, before being a sex therapist, you know, I've gotten to be like a Shambhala meditation guide and a holistic health coach. And so I kind of come from a very holistic background, but I think that's part of why sex is fascinating because it's kind of like never just about sex. It's never just about the act of sex. There's always a lot of layers to it. But yeah, so I think there's layers.
It applies to all different aspects of the human psyche, of the way we live our lives. I mean, our lives are layered. We don't often think of them that way, but our lives themselves are layered. And those layers can be daunting. They can really, you can get pretty messed up.
Yeah, right.
We're good at that.
We make everything complicated. It's our specialty.
We kind of do, huh? Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, it's good to laugh at it though, you know? So it's like, yeah, for people listening, like, it's okay. It's okay if you're a little complex. It's okay if you have contradictory thoughts and parts. It's like we all do, you know?
Yeah. Perfection is not real. And I think that this is the beauty of the journey. Like this is what you're supposed to experience because it's not just about sex, or you could say that about multiple different things. There's so much within it. And that is the juiciness. And until you tap into that, you're not really living.
I love that.
Do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I want for people is to kind of like tap into the juiciness. It's like when we do some of the deeper work to free up our minds and get comfortable with our bodies, it's like then we can like really freely explore, you know, fantasies and ways to connect in different aspects of ourselves and how we want to express our sexuality, you know, like I think there's a lot of layers to it that is a society we're not really tapping into yet. And I want to help people tap into that.
That's beautiful.
We're nearing the end here of a really fascinating conversation, and I'm realizing this is the time when I always have to say, hey, we can't let you go yet. We got to get some information from you. We got to find out more. We got to find out more for anyone who's interested. How do they reach out to you? How do they learn more about themselves? How do they learn what can they do to further their own journey?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. So I think we mentioned some things today, right, that people can do to kind of work with their parts or do the mirror work or check out some books. But, if people are curious about working with me, they can check out my website. It's just my name, heathershannon.co. So it's not a .com. It's just .co. And I do have a freebies page on there. So if they are interested, I have a Sex for Empaths checklist. And really whether
empaths.
I know. So people who are like energetically sensitive or, you know, maybe feel like they pick up on other people's vibes really easily, you know, have to be a little more mindful, I think, with sex. But I actually used it with a client this morning because I think it's actually just a great list for everybody. You know, I'm very non-judgmental. I'm like, I don't care if you've had sex with 100 people this week. You know what I mean? It's just like, is it working for you? Is kind of the question. And so the list helps people figure out, like, is this working for you? Like, are you kind of owning your own sexual journey, or are you trying to like outsource your validation to somebody and you're using sex that way? Wow. You know, are you caring enough about the other person's joy and pleasure? Or are you just like in it for yourself? Or do they care about yours? Can you talk about safety? Are you clear with like how important that stuff is to you? Like, you know, pregnancy or STIs or whatever it may be. And so the list kind of helps people keep their heads straight with that. So, so that's a free resource. If they want to check that out. I also have a Mojo Magic guidebook. It's like 8 or 9 pages, not super long, but if you're struggling with libido, which we know a lot of people are, it's complex. And so before becoming a sex therapist, I had no clue. Like, I don't know. What do you do? Yeah. So it at least gives people a place to start with like, okay, you know what? I relate to some of these issues that might be the causes, and I haven't really tried some of these things that might be the solution. So, you know, that can impact marriages and relationships a lot. And so that can be an important one just to get started on. Yeah. So both of those are there. heathershannon.co/freebies.
We'll make sure we get a link to that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
We'll make it easy for somebody who wants to explore a little bit further this untouchable realm. Oh my God.
I know. Right. It's like not so untouchable anymore. It's okay.
Not so untouchable. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So Jody, I got to ask you, I mean, we always talk about how we have these really interesting conversations. How did we do today?
Oh, awesome. I could think of 2 reasons why people have sex problems: libido and sexual trauma.
Yeah.
And it just opened up my eyes to, you know, how big and complex this conversation is, and really going the next layer deeper. It's not just about the sex. So thank you for that, Heather Shannon.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jody.
Thank you very much. And also, this is something I'm making this a point of doing this with guest after guest, because I'm realizing this is vitally important. Thank you on behalf of the people you have helped over the years who have never met you, who have never seen you. They've just read something, they saw something, and you'll never know how you helped them, but
That's
you
so
helped
kind.
them.
Thank you.
So on behalf of those people, thank you for what you do.
Appreciate that, Walt.
Aww.
It's so sweet.
I'm getting a little emotional over here.
I know, me too.
We don't recognize that enough. That's why I'm making this a point to do this with guests from now on. And I've been doing this for about a month now, and it really pays off because we don't get that recognition. It's important recognition.
Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, yeah, the work you guys are doing as a podcast host.
Yeah, sure.
Most people, some people might leave a review or reach out to you, but most of them won't.
Most of them won't.
I know, it's fat, but you're still helping them. It's so cool.
So that's why I want, on their behalf, I want to thank everybody who's helping them. And you're definitely one of those people. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for sharing your story and your interesting observations with us today. This has been a lot of fun.
I know. It's been really fun talking to both of you too. And I appreciate your observations as well.
Very good. We love that. So thank you much. Thank you, live streamers. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.